Hi all you lovely kings, queens, and in-betweens. My name is Elaine, and I want to welcome you to my Unison League Mage 7th Ring Guide. I'm going to go through each shiny new non-passive ability in the Archmage's ring one by one and provide my thoughts on them now that I've had the chance to play around a bit. Give a little review of their capabilities and what they might be good for, if anything. And now, without any further ado, I'm just going to jump right into things with Weakened, which has a cooldown of 4 seconds and a cost of 9. It's a mage exclusive ability which targets one enemy with an ability power of 150. It deals magic damage 3 times with a success value of 100. It increases all stats by 20% for 15 seconds. One could argue that this ability's strength lies in its low cost and cooldown, but that's not the only great thing about it. It has a solid ability power of 150, hits its target multiple times, and won't miss unless blind is in effect, I suppose. Weakened also has the added bonus of decreasing the target's stats for 15 seconds, making them more susceptible to damage and thus an untimely demise, and also weaker, which makes it more likely that you and your team will survive. This move is great for both PvE and PvP. Although it lacks penetrating abilities, it's something that you can spam fairly frequently between area attacks, allowing you to blast through quests at a rapid pace when used in conjunction with these attacks and pick off weaker and injured enemies, or weaken them so someone else can pick them off. Next up is Transmagic Wall, which has a cooldown of 40 seconds and cost of 0. It's a mage exclusive ability which damages you for 30% of your max HP. It recovers your cost by 25. It targets yourself and your adjacent allies, so a max of 3 targets in total. It applies an effect that reflects 50% of physical and magic damage taken for 5 seconds. It cannot be used when you have less than 30% of your max HP remaining. This ability is an updated version of the mage's earlier abilities, Ether Exchange and Fanatic Soul. Surprisingly, or perhaps not given Unison League's logic, it's the ability that falls in the middle of the 3. Like both previous cost recovery abilities awarded the mage, it has a base cooldown of 40 seconds and a cost of 0. Unlike Ether Exchange, it has a secondary portion to its ability, making it better than it in that regard, but worse in the sense that it's mage exclusive. This is not something your non-mage friends can use, or something you can use when you're not playing as a mage either. However, Transmagic Wall recovers 5 more cost per use than Ether Exchange's base form, and the same amount as Fanatic Soul base form, 25 cost in all. Unlike the others, Transmagic Wall requires you to give blood to the blood god in order to use 30% of your max HP. Where Fanatic Soul exceeds Transmagic Wall is in its secondary effect. Fanatic Soul's base increases the critical damage ability power of all allies by 20 for 40 seconds. Whereas Transmagic Wall targets yourself and your adjacent allies, so a max of 3 targets in total. It applies an effect that reflects 50% of physical and magic damage taken for 5 seconds. So Fanatic Soul is clearly superior for several reasons. First, its secondary effect lasts 35 seconds longer than Transmagic Wall's. Second, Fanatic Soul affects all of your allies as opposed to Transmagic Wall's mere 3. Third, Fanatic Soul gives your team a boost that could raise your team's damage output, and is harder for the enemy to clear and contend with, partially because of its length and partially because of the few counters available such as monster abilities. Then the coupling of defensive and offensive abilities awarded to Transmagic Wall. Basically, the enemy has to have a good healer or good healers, not be squishy AF, and not be facing classes that have increased chances of inflicting break, like the Lancer, among probably some other things I'm conveniently forgetting in the case of Fanatic Soul. With Transmagic Wall, the effect is not only 5 seconds, but something that can be easily countered by things such as piercing, aka penetration skills, and certain defensive gear. Cost recovery abilities are extremely helpful in Unison League no matter what you're doing because they ensure that you have a way to recover costs more readily so you can keep attacking and defeating your enemies, utilize heals that will keep your team alive, and utilize utilities that will help your team in various ways. Unfortunately, Transmagic Wall just isn't as good as Fanatic Soul, so I would keep Fanatic Soul in your lineup and give Transmagic Wall a miss. Then came Star Blast, which has a cooldown of 10 seconds and a cost of 30. It's a mage exclusive ability, which is usable when you have a relic type weapon equipped in your main slot. It targets one enemy at random with an ability power of 150, deals magic damage 10 times with a success value of 80. It damages you for 25% of your max HP. The target changes with each of your attacks. It cannot be used when you have less than 25% of your max HP remaining. This ability's name makes me feel as though it's meant to be an updated version of Star Burst, and I suppose in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. First, Star Blast has a significantly higher ability power than Star Burst, 150 to Star Burst 70. Star Blast hits twice as often as Star Burst, 10 to 5, but has the same chance of hitting the target, 80. The abilities start to really differ when you take the fact that Starburst ignores both damage reduction and reflection into consideration, whereas Starblast does not, and Starburst requires you to use 30 cost, twice as much as Starburst, in addition to 25% of your max HP to use. The difference in cooldown is negligible, 8 seconds for Starburst and 10 seconds for Starblast, so only a 2-second difference. So what does this all boil down to? Ultimately, I think Starburst is the better option for a few different reasons. First, it has a lower cooldown and significantly lower cost than Starblast. Second, although it has a lower ability power and hits less often than Starblast, Starburst ignores damage reduction and reflection, which allows you to make the most of the ability, whereas you might have some trouble doing that with Starblast. However, those extra hits could also help even things out, so it's a bit hard to judge. Third, Starblast requires you to equip a relic in your main slot in order to use it. If you're free to play or a newer player, you may not have a very good one or an infused one, so you're probably going to take a bit of a hit when it comes to stats. This probably won't be anything profound, but it's something to keep in mind. However, arguably the largest drawback for Starblast is its consumption of HP, because unlike an ability such as Siphon, it doesn't heal you. Thus, you have to manage your health a little more closely than you would with an ability such as Siphon or Starburst, and ultimately place more pressure on your cleric to keep you alive. Ultimately, the question of whether to use Starburst or Starblast, or neither, is entirely up to you, but my personal preference is for Starburst. It's a great ability to use in both quests and in PvP, but with PvP you have to consider how it'll feed the enemy. Since both Starblast and Burst hit multiple times and have the ability to deal great loads of damage, especially against soldiers, which will often be downed in a single use, one must consider how much they will feed the enemy if they fail to down them with a single round of either ability. In this case, feeding involves raising the enemy's Unison gauge, which can be done at a rapid pace when they are hit repeatedly, and especially if they take a lot of damage. When facing an active player, this can be problematic because they could release one of their monster's wrath and probably wipe you and your team. And once that initial wipe has been set into motion, it can be difficult to recover, which may very well cost you the game. Next up is Miserable Disaster, which has a cooldown of 30 seconds and a cost of 20. It's a mage exclusive ability, which is usable when a staff is equipped in your main slot. It targets one enemy and their adjacent enemies, a max of 3 enemies with an ability power of 80. It deals magic damage 2 to 5 times that penetrates damage reduction and reflection effects with a success value of 100. It reduces status ailment resistance by 30 for 15 seconds. This excludes cooldown reduction and dual attack. This ability is a bit of a mixed bag. It is both a high cost and cooldown, which I'm not a fan of. However, it targets multiple enemies, which is pretty cool since it could help you blast your quest more rapidly and also other players. It has the added benefits of hitting multiple times, including penetration abilities as well, and reducing the target's status ailment resistance, which may make them more susceptible to an untimely demise, less likely to hit their targets, which will help increase both your own and your team's survivability, etc. Miserable Disaster's low ability power is definitely made up for by its secondary effects, such as the penetration abilities, area of attack, etc. So it may be worth incorporating into your set and could definitely be helpful in both PvE and PvP, which I mentioned previously. However, like Starburst and Starblast, it can be a feeder ability, so this is something to keep in mind. Next is Time Spell Book, which has a cooldown of 8 seconds and a cost of 18. It's a mage exclusive ability, which is usable when a book is equipped in your main slot. It targets one enemy and their adjacent enemies, a maximum of 3 enemies, with an ability power of 160. It deals magic damage 3 times using both magical attack and defense with a success value of 100. It activates Time Slice, which reduces the time advantageous effects, buffs, special buffs, and non-removable buffs of the targets by 10 seconds. It also has a healing ability power of 60, which heals your HP. Time Spell Book is a decent ability, and the one that is arguably the best or the mid-tier of the 3 new main slot weapon exclusive abilities that were added this ring, depending on how you look at things. It has a nice low cooldown, but a higher cost. A decent ability power of 160, although not particularly high, an area of attack with multiple hits. It uses both of the stats that a mage receives the most passive boosts in to determine its damage output, so pretty good there, but it lacks the penetration ability of Miserable Disaster. So you're definitely going to be losing some of its damage output potential if you don't have penetration abilities in play because of a monster effect, etc. I also appreciate how it reduces the time advantageous effects that are applied to the target or targets, and that it heals you. So it makes this ability better than Starblast in my opinion, and a contender for the best new main slot exclusive ability along with Miserable Disaster. A few things. Its potential for high damage output alongside its expanded area of attack and multiple hits, the fact that it reduces the amount of time advantageous effects are applied to the targets, doesn't consume your HP upon use like Starblast, and that it heals you. I think this latter ability is arguably the most beneficial for a few different reasons. First, mages are often fairly squishy and take a fair amount of damage, especially when faced with lancers, so having something that heals you is always beneficial, especially when you don't have a cleric or anyone with a healing ability on your team. Second, there are several great mage abilities that require you to pay with your HP to use. Most players probably have one or more of these abilities in their set. I don't know many mages who don't carry Fanatic Soul, for example. So having an ability that recovers health is beneficial for mages, especially because it can help offset the cost of those abilities. Finally, having anything that takes some pressure off your healer is always beneficial in my book. Although I think this ability is good for both PvP and PvE, it may be slightly more beneficial in PvE settings due to its lack of penetration abilities, which I feel don't come into play as often in PvE as PvP. So you could get more out of it in those settings than in PvP settings. Next is Suicide Black, which has a cooldown of 7 seconds and costs nothing to use. It's a mage exclusive ability which targets one enemy with an ability power of 110. It deals magic damage 5 times with a success value of 100 and restores 5% of damage dealt as HP. It applies Insanity for 10 seconds with a success value of 50. When inflicted with Insanity, the afflicted cannot select the abilities they wish to use, will randomly use abilities every 5 seconds, and there is a roughly 25% chance for an ability to be replaced with one of the following. An attack which damages you for 40% of your current HP, a heal which heals your opponent or opponents for 5% of their max HP, hinder which reduces your Unison gauge by 10, or boost which increases your opponent's stats by 80%. Suicide Black also decreases your Unison gauge by 5 and reduces your HP recovery effects by 50% for 10 seconds. This excludes cooldown reduction and dual attack. This is another ability which feels like a bit of a mixed bag for me. It has an extremely low cooldown and costs nothing but your blood. It has a meh ability power, but won't miss unless something like blind is in effect. It also restores some of your HP, which is always helpful because it can offset the cost of its ability and take some pressure off of your cleric. I like that it applies Insanity, but not how likely it is that Insanity will miss the target, a 50% chance. As a reminder, the following effects take place when Insanity is applied to a target. A target will randomly use an ability every 5 seconds and cannot choose any abilities for themselves. And there is roughly 25% chance that the ability to use will be one of the following. An attack that damages the user for 40% of their HP, a heal that restores 5% of an enemy HP maximum, hinder, which reduces the afflicted Unison gauge by 10, or boost, which increases the enemy's stats by 80%. Obviously, this is a bit OP because it could really damage the afflicted, making it extremely easy for you to pick them off. This would be especially useful if the target is a stronger player. It could help heal you or your team, which not only increases your survivability, but takes some pressure off your healer. It could reduce the enemy's Unison gauge, which, while not helpful for PvE since monsters don't have those, it could help in PvP because it's basically a free use of negative pressure, which could keep an enemy from helping their team in a Unison battle so you can wipe them all, or it could increase your stats or that of a team member, which could help them survive and increase damage output, healing ability, etc., depending on what they're playing. The Unison gauge reduction effect for yourself, 5 points, is annoying, but not horrible. You can gain that back easily with a single ability use, if not 2. The HP recovery effect reduction isn't too bad since it only lasts 10 seconds. So to sum up why it's a mixed bag, it's basically med damage output to a single target, despite its multiple hits, with a few weird demerits upon use. If I had to choose, I would say that this is better for PvP, even though it's not that strong, simply because of its ability to inflict Insanity from time to time. But honestly, I wouldn't bother taking it. There are so many better abilities out there. Last up on the list is Diminishment, which has a cooldown of 30 seconds and a cost of 20. It's a mage exclusive ability which targets all enemies. It activates Time Extend, which increases the time disadvantageous effects, debuffs, special debuffs, and non-removable debuffs, which are applied to the target by 10 seconds for one time only. I am not a fan of this ability. I think its cost and cooldown are too down high for its effect, which isn't particularly helpful because it only extends time disadvantageous effects for 10 seconds, which isn't too helpful. Especially because it's so easy to wipe out the enemy when those effects are in place, because it's easy for the enemy to clear most of them with things like cleric abilities, because some of those can only be put in place by things like monster effects. It just doesn't seem like something that's going to be a useful ability to bring, especially because it can be countered fairly easily in many cases. And there you have it, Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, my guide to Unison League's 7th Mage ring, or the Archmage ring. What did you think of my guide, and what do you think of these new abilities? Let me know down below in the comments. I always like to know what you guys think. And if you like what you saw here today, please smash that like button until it's blue, subscribe, ring that bell so you'll know what's up, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!